From gerrymandering to offshore drilling to Joe Cunningham and Katie Arrington, I speak exclusively with former United States congressional candidate Dimitri Cherny for a special edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And be sure to download the free Quintin's Close-Ups app in your Apple or Google Play stores. Dimitri Cherny, it's so good to see you again. How are you?
Good. Great to see you.
Likewise.
Yeah.
You know, I went on your Facebook profile and it just reads this: Managing Director of Appropriate Evolution Company, and of course you're the former candidate for Cherny Congress.
Mm-hmm.
What is it like to be Dimitri Cherny these days?
It's actually a lot more relaxed. You know, I've been a candidate in one form or another for almost 6 years. And so now losing the primary, and it was an experiment, obviously, the primary that I did this year. Losing the primary was kind of relaxing.
Okay.
And now I'm very hopeful that Joe Cunningham will win. From my previous experience, from all of our previous experiences, I don't think he can. I think the gerrymandering is too strong, but I hope some miracle comes through this year, he wins, and I can step back from having to do this stuff. I can step back from having any sort of political aspirations, because I wanted to go to Washington to try to make a difference, but if Joe could be up there and do it instead, I'm fine. And so I'm back in my own private life, and you know, I've gotten back into things I like doing, engineering and playing around with high-tech toys and things like that. So yeah.
That's amazing. Okay. From the time that you announced that you were going to run for this particular district to the end of the primary, what have you learned about this first congressional district now that you didn't know a couple of months ago?
Yeah, you know, I was hopeful that people would recognize the same thing that I had recognized after 2016, and that was that the state is just too gerrymandered for anyone other than someone with a Republican after their name to actually win. I mean, that's what all the numbers showed in 2016. We did the analysis on 6 of the 7 congressional districts where we had Democratic challengers running in 2016, and we all lost by 50,000 or 70,000 or 100,000 votes. And that really all boiled down to gerrymandering. So I thought the only way you can actually beat the gerrymandering in South Carolina is run in the primary instead. And so you run in the primary, and really the primary, and it's the Republican primary, is the election that matters in South Carolina, and it always has. And so I thought, well, I'll run in the primary, and hopefully I'll get 30,000 or 40,000 people that have voted for me in 2016 to recognize the strategy and vote for me. And there I would become the Republican candidate, but obviously I'm not a Republican. And then you know, we would actually have one of our people in Congress that way. But unfortunately, only 1,980 people understood the strategy and voted for me. And so I'm like, well, you know, it's an idea before its time. And as you know, and we've been talking about this for years, every one of my campaigns has been an experiment in how do you win? How do you try to make the country better? How do you move things forward? And so this was an experiment that was ahead of its time. And you know, maybe if Joe doesn't win in this year, we try something else in 2020 again. There's more experiments we could run.
You talk about Joe Cunningham. How could he make it better as far as that particular district if he's elected?
Well, I mean, if he's elected, you know, his ideas are more along toward the progressive side, and so I think he'll be voting for all the right things. And I think Joe, just like I was at his age, doesn't understand the bigger issues, the bigger sort of civilization-threatening issues out there, and the fixes for them. But you know, he's willing to learn. He's willing to listen too, and he's interested in making things better for everyone. And I think that's really the big difference between Republican candidates and Democratic candidates in South Carolina. Republican candidates want to make things better for their people. And I think, Katie Arrington is sort of a prime example of exactly that. She's talking about the difference between good and evil, and that's the way she's pitting this race between her and Joe right now. And no, it's not between good and evil. We're trying to make things better for everybody, and some of us want to do that, and some of us don't. I think Joe wants to do that too.
A couple of things that stuck out to me. Civilization issues.
Mm-hmm.
What are they as we sit here right now?
Well, I mean, global climate change is the biggest one. I mean, right now, what's the date? We're the middle of October.
The day before my birthday.
I think it's gonna crack 90 degrees here.
Oh, yeah, that's
today.
right.
So
That's
yeah,
right.
that's a little scary. So, I mean, and we're seeing global effects of that all over the place. I mean, this Cat 4 hurricane that was 1 mile per hour short of a Cat 5 that went from a Cat 2 to a Cat 4 in 24 hours in the Gulf.
Right.
I mean, that's unheard of, that kind of thing. So we're seeing huge effects from climate change. And right now, we know the oceans are rising around here. And again, the 1st Congressional District most likely will be underwater at high tide twice a day 50 years from now, almost all of the districts. So, and yet nobody's talking about any of that stuff. And then the other bigger issue was the same thing I'm always talking about was, income inequality and wealth inequality in America. It's worse now than it ever has been. It's worse now than it was before the great robber, or after the great robber barons of the 1800s, late 1800s and early 1900s. And nobody's really talking about that at all. So, and there's some things that we could do to make it so that things would be more equal. Like, for example, Medicare for all. I mean, if we implemented universal single-payer health care, suddenly an awful lot of the fear here in America would be decreased, because so many people are very concerned about having health insurance and having health care. And you and I, well, you especially, are young enough and healthy enough, I know because you're running and stuff, and you don't have to be so concerned about getting sick and things like that. And frankly, I'm 20, 30 years older than you, but I'm also really healthy and I'm not so concerned about it. But a lot of people just aren't. And I have friends who have chronic health issues that didn't happen because of anything wrong that they did. It's just that was the flip of the dice for them, and yet they are living in squalor because of that, and can't pay for their medical bills and things. So we need a system that will do that, where we reduce the level of fear for everybody. And Medicare for all is the number one thing. I think it would do that for everybody. If we had Medicare for all for everyone for 10 years or so, I think the general level of fear among the American populace would decrease, and everyone would feel a little bit more comfortable, a little easier about making other social changes that make life better for all of us again. And that's the difference. We want to make things better for all of us. We don't want to make it so that in a capitalist system, if you're the winner of the system, you can afford all the good things in life. No, we think everybody should have some minimum quality of life that's pretty decent. And having health care paid for is one way to do that.
And you talk about quality of life. Obviously, the big topic in the 1st Congressional District right now is about offshore drilling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where should this discussion go in your mind?
Well, as I said in my campaign, it's not about offshore drilling. We should not just stop offshore drilling, we should stop onshore drilling. I mean, we're to the point now, the IPCC just came out with this report about climate change, and they say basically we have 12 years to get completely off of fossil fuels, or we reach these tipping points, which we will never recover from. And your kids, you and I have talked about exactly this before in other interviews, your kids will be living in a dystopian future that is unlike anything anyone in the world has seen for 200 years, or maybe longer, and with no way out. That's the problem. So do we want a future for humanity or not? And if we do, no more fossil fuels. We should be off of fossil fuels, and I've been saying this now since 2014 when I first started running. We need to be off of fossil fuels by 2025. completely. Everybody around the planet needs to be off of them. And America is the country that can take the lead on this. And we need to get it together and get us off of fossil fuels. And I propose plans, and lots of other people have proposed plans to do it. Now, the big concern for most people is, well, I don't want to stop driving my truck, and I don't want to have to drive an electric car. And then people that know more about it, they go, well, that just shifts the burden of the energy from the fossil fuel companies to who's producing the electricity for my electric cars and things like that. And where's that electricity coming from? But what we need to do is we need to go to biofuels instead. Biofuels is the intermediate step. And we could grow enough algae in the United States to produce all of the oil needs in the country and get completely off of fossil fuels, and we could build up an entire economy based on that in a matter of 3 or 4 years. Because the oil companies have been experimenting with this now for 15 years. They know it's coming down the pike. They're just waiting for us to push them to do it. And suddenly, no more drilling of things out of the oil, there's no more mining, and they're growing oil, and they're converting oil in the same refineries they're using today from algae oil into gasoline. And the thing is, it's carbon neutral. Everybody still goes to the gas station, they still pump their gasoline, they still pump their diesel exactly the same way. But now there's no additional carbon going to the atmosphere because the carbon that created that oil from the algae came out of the atmosphere just 2 or 3 weeks before. So it's all carbon neutral. And then we can start dialing down the total level of carbon in the atmosphere. That's the way to do it.
What would the economy look like after that?
Exactly the same as today. Oil companies would still exist. Everything would still be exactly the same, except we would not be putting additional carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
Let me get back to Katie Arrington, and I believe what she said to Kelly Golden recently about the good versus the evil.
Yeah. Right.
What exactly does that mean in your mind?
I mean, Katie likes to be sensational on these things. And she's appealing to her base, which a lot of the Trump supporters, that's red meat for them. They want to see that it is a civilizational challenge between good and evil. I mean, who was it? George W. did the same thing when he was pitting us against, before ISIS, Al-Qaeda. And it was a civilizational struggle between good and evil. And, it's not really good and evil. Everybody has their own personal motivations for doing things, and you have to understand what those motivations are. And it's exactly the same here in America. That we may be voting for Democrats, we may be voting for Republicans, we may consider ourselves conservatives or liberals or progressives or whatever it is, but everybody has their own motivations for doing those things that they think are probably going to be the best in the end for themselves or for everybody in general. And that's what you have to keep in mind. Is what you're deciding to do going to be the best for me and my people, or is it going to be best for me and the entire population? And I think that's the way we need to think about it. But pitting people against each other to think that they're good and evil, that's just bad. It's just wrong thinking entirely.
The population for the 1st Congressional District, how would that look in 5 to 10 years in your mind?
It seems to be growing still. I mean, and so, again, the district will be redistricted in 2021.
Right.
And they're probably going to shrink it down again, but I'm sure as long as the legislature in Columbia is Republican controlled, again, it's going to be gerrymandered, so it's going to favor Republican candidates here, but probably by, again, 70,000 votes. So, I'm very interested in seeing what happens on November 6th this year and see how it turns out. But I think we're probably going to see exactly what we saw before, that Joe is probably going to lose by 50,000 votes because there just are more people here that identify as Republican than identify as Democrats. I mean, more and more people are coming in, more Yankees are coming in that identify as Democrats, but I don't think it's enough to overcome what's going on. And then, of course, by the time maybe enough of them do get here, by 2021, they'll redistrict it, and we start all over again. So gerrymandering has led to this great schism that we have in America right now. where we're being pitted against each other, and we're not all getting a good representative voice in Congress in Washington.
You talk about congressmen, you talk about Washington, you talk about votes, obviously you talk about candidates. What happened with Mark Sanford in your mind?
You know, I think Mark, I mean, obviously he has his own personal issues. I discussed this with a lot of people, but I think Mark has matured. I think he's become more ethical, more moral, and so I think he didn't want to play the game just to win. I think he wanted to do the right thing. I think that's really what happened.
And to this day, are you still surprised that he's not really siding with President Trump on certain issues in your mind?
No, I think he's taken the right stance. I think he's taken the stance that he feels is correct, and I agree with him on that. So, yeah.
And let me get back to the current candidates.
Yeah.
Joe Cunningham and obviously Katie Arrington. The day after my birthday, they'll be at the debate at the Charleston Southern University. What exactly should Joe Cunningham, as you are a supporter of his, what should he talk to the constituents and the voters about now?
I mean, Joe's kind of taken a different slant at it than I have. I kind of just laid out what I'm talking about. I think we have much more in common than we have apart. Joe is, for one reason or another, I don't know why, I haven't been part of his campaign at all. I support him, but he hasn't asked me to come into that. But I think he's settling on the issues, the hot button issues like the offshore drilling, where there's a clear differentiation between he and Katie, and it's local issues, and he's trying to keep it all to local issues. I was always trying to raise the campaign to something higher, the more the civilization-threatening things, the longer-term things. I think maybe he's right in doing this. I mean, he's certainly been able to raise an awful lot more money than I ever was. You know, I think he's going to close this campaign out with raising and spending $3 million, which is going to be like, you know, like nobody has ever spent that in the 1st Congressional District. So we'll see if it's going to be enough to win, but I don't think it is. So.
And if you were to go and be in the audience of that debate on Tuesday, or even watch on television,
Yeah.
I know I'm being redundant, but what do you want to hear from Joe Cunningham?
That's a good question. What would I want to hear from Joe? I mean, I'm gonna support him no matter what he would say at this point, just because he is at the opposite end of the spectrum from Katie, and I think Katie has just drank way too much of the Trump Kool-Aid. And anyone is going to be better than Katie at this point. And not to say that Joe is not a good guy. Joe is a good guy, but I don't really care what he says. He still has my vote at this point. So I'm just hopeful that a lot of other people will see just how intense and a little crazy Katie is in her support for Trump. You know, her over-the-top support for Trump.
Dimitri Cherny, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate this.
Nice, Quintin.
Thank you.
Good to talk to you, man.
Likewise.
Yeah.